Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to week 14 of the NFL Edge Breakdown with myself and the man, the DFS guru, Mike Johnson. And we are recording this on Saturday afternoon. The World Cup game's getting ready to start. So I appreciate Mike jumping in with this. I had a funeral yesterday I had to attend, so we're a little bit behind here today. But it also gave us an update to get access to a few more things. If you're listening to us on 1.5 speed on a podcast, you can also check us out on YouTube and see our pretty faces with some of the breakdowns of this game. We're going to break down the Texans at the Cowboys. We're going to break down the Chiefs at the Broncos. We're going to break down the Panthers at the Seahawks and end with the Bucs at the Niners. How you doing today, Mike?
Doing well. Saturday, so a little closer. It's kind of nice the later you do these. I know the timing's always tough, but you have more information. You know more about weather and injuries and that sort of thing. So excited to dig in here.
Well, we're going to start before we came on. We were talking a little bit. We're just going to get the Texans and the Cowboys game basically out of the way. I was trying to look up. I just didn't have time because I had to drive and I just got back, but I couldn't pull real quick. The last time a team total for an NFL team was only at 13 points, right? Mike, you break it down. You talk about, David Mills is back, but no Nico, no Cooks, right? Playing, a 30-point team total in the Cowboys. The question really for me is, do you want an exposure to the Cowboys here? And, in the case that they just decide they want to put it on them and the Cowboys go put up 40 points by themselves.
Yeah, so it's a particularly interesting spot because I think there's a lot of risk here on the Cowboys side, which is weird to say about a team that, is projected to score 30.5 points and has scored over 40 points 3 times in the 6 games since Dak Prescott returned from injury. So, but the worry I have is this is a team that is playing really as well as any team in the NFL right now. They've clearly got Super Bowl aspirations and they've got the team that can do it. And this Texans team has just been so bad. Last week, the Browns really let them stay in that game. The Browns just played really poorly in the first half. But if you look 2 weeks back, they played the Dolphins, and the Dolphins were up 30-0 at halftime without really doing much. And the Dolphins kind of shut it down in the second half. They didn't score any more points, and they were very conservative. And so that kind of makes it tough for me. Like you said, Davis Mills is back. The Texans have not been good offensively, and they're without their 2 best wide receivers. So it's a situation where I'm a little fearful that the Texans just are so bad in the first half. The Cowboys have short fields, and it's a thing where the Cowboys could be up 31-3 at halftime, and everybody could be having fine games, but what are they going to do in that second half? I think Zeke and Pollard are both they're both very critical pieces to the Cowboys' long-term plans, and I could see a situation where Malik Davis is playing the last quarter and a half. And then you look at the Cowboys' passing game, and CeeDee Lamb's very expensive. Gallup and Schultz are solid plays, but they don't necessarily – the game doesn't set up to where they're going to have like 25-point games that blow up. So – it's just a thing where from a season-long standpoint, play all your Cowboys. But from a DFS standpoint, everybody could do well. The Cowboys could smash. And other than the defense, you might not really want any of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot for me here and how you play this and where you go. Let's do a little recap last week while we're talking about this one. Did you, because I haven't got to talk to you about it yet, so I have no idea. Did you manage to play? We talked about it. Our whole thing was the revenge narrative last week. It was the title of our podcast. It was the title of everything we put out. Did you play any Hurts double stacks? And where did you end up there on that side? Because that was the game, one of the big games we talked about.
No, I had a decent amount of Devontae. Didn't really land on much AJ Brown. And then, Hurts I didn't really get to. So wasn't a profitable week for me.
Man, that's sorry to hear that. I did. I got there. I said I'm going to spend the money because it was an ownership perspective. When I started seeing the combination of ownership between all three, I thought that ledge could be there. I really would have. So one of my lineups had Burks. I would have loved to seen where that went had Burks not got that concussion. That one had a ton of opportunity. And you saw I messaged you. I pivoted in the afternoon. Sure wish Kittle would have got there, but I got to Dotson. It was one of my ways I left myself open was in that salary change. And part of that was, we did talk about it last week that was a spot to really, you could probably expose and go after. So I was curious to see how you came across there, because for me, this game lends into the opposite of that. I brought that up to say, right, you could see where, the Eagles would want to step on the gas. They would want to keep going. And here you just brought it up, right? Do the Cowboys really want to put any extra wear and tear on Pollard, on Zeke, on Dak, on Lamb, on Schultz, right? I wouldn't be surprised if they're cruising there to see, right? Cooper Kupp with a quarter and a half, right?
Cooper Rush.
Yeah. So see him rush there with a quarter and a half. And, that type of thing, if they're just absolutely, crushing them as the Vegas total says it could, and the other side is, maybe they just run the ball into the ground and they just control the clock and maybe they win, 21-3, right? And they just don't even try to put up all those points because they're like, right, we don't have to, right? We're looking further down the road. We're going to cover this game and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to score a lot of points. I'm not really concerned about that. I'd be kind of surprised if Dallas doesn't get over their team total. I'd be kind of surprised if if they're not scoring 31 or more points. I'd find that surprising. You just look at how they've played even this last week. I mean, they had 54 points against the Colts, and the onslaught happened. And their defense is so good. That's the issue, is that Houston's going to try to run the ball and try to keep it close early, but the Cowboys offense is going to score, and they're going to have to open it up a little bit. And I mean, this Cowboys defense it leads the league in combined sacks and turnovers on the season. And that's just not a good situation. But that's why I said in my write-up that I think the Cowboys defense is the best value under $4,000 on the slate this week. And I don't see a scenario where they're not scoring 12 to 15 points. And I think, you look at the last 2 weeks, the Dolphins and Browns defenses are averaging 24 DraftKings points. And the Cowboys are better than both of those units, and the Cowboys offense is going to put up more points and put more pressure on the Texans to throw. So, yeah, this is like a 45-7 type spot is what I see. It's just a matter of can that production condense? Is there a scenario where the Cowboys are up 31-3 or 31-0 at halftime, and somehow Gallup broke a big play, and there was Zeke got tackled, or Pollard got tackled at the 2, and then he threw a touchdown to Schultz, and then could all the production come through the air? Could the touchdowns come through the air unexpectedly? Or that the most likely scenario is Zeke and Pollard combined for 200 to 230 total yards between the two of them and two or three touchdowns. Like, is there a way where one of them could have 130 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns on their own? Like, could that split not be so even? And there's 2 ways you could go with that. And I think both running backs are viable, because Pollard's the more explosive guy. He's more involved in the passing game. He can certainly get there. If you look at his production over the last 5 weeks, he has, I think, 4 games of 24 or more DraftKings points, something like that, with a couple of them. One is like 35 and one's 39 points. So you look at that, and he's only priced at $6,700, and it's insane. Obviously, that's because of the usage stuff, but it's like crazy to think about. On the other hand, you talk about narratives and the Cowboys, riding into the ground that like Zeke is their guy and trying to justify that contract. And it's like, this could be a spot where it's just low hanging fruit. They could just feed him. They could give him, 3/4 of the work in the first half and let him, they want him to be the guy that gets 3 touchdowns and is jumping in the Salvation Army thing. And, it makes them look good. Obviously, in high leverage spots, I think that everybody can realize Pollard's like that dude now. But I could see like a narrative sort of thing where they're going out of their way to get Zeke involved. So, and in small field, I think it's very viable to play both together. And there's a lot of ways you could go with it. I think it's viable to leave it alone altogether because of the volume risks that we talked about. But there's a lot of scoring to go around here, and if that condenses in any certain way, that's going to be something you probably need to have.
Yeah, that's if it does, right? If it condenses, right? Where are you gonna be able to go there? That's right, like the $10 million question we need the answer to this week. So interesting to see. The Dallas D is I don't care what the ownership is, I'm playing them, right? Like this is the spot, right? You had to have the Browns last week, and I had some Browns exposure. I had a ton of, the next game we're going to talk about, I had a ton of Broncos exposure, which at the price point was nice until the Browns got to that 30-point total, and you're just like, oh my gosh, right? But again, you pay up, and it took me off a couple of my, my mid-price guys that I really liked last week, and how you could pivot there and what you could do as far as that goes. So it'll be interesting to see how we get there. And if you come check out the DFS interpretation on 1 week, you can see a little better breakdown of that.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, we got a much higher scoring point total. The Broncos have projected 4 more point total than the Texans this week.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was looking at a stat. And then we got the Chiefs, who is, has one of the highest projections on the slate. This is a unique spot for me. I'm really interested to hear your, how you want to attack this and what your thoughts about exposure are to this game with some of the ownership we're seeing so far.
Yeah, so it's an interesting spot, and I kind of talked about the Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes stuff in my breakdown. But so basically, if you're playing Kelce, you kind of need to play Mahomes. When Kelce has a big game that justifies his price, it always comes with a 30-point game from Mahomes as well. So if you're going to play Kelce, you pretty much have to play Mahomes with him. Along with that, though, if you look at Kelce, he's averaging 16.9 points per game in the 7 games where the Chiefs score 27 points or fewer, and 28.2 DraftKings points per game when the Chiefs have scored 30 or more points. So a lot of this comes down to, like, what do you think this Chiefs team, what do you think that they are capable of doing against the Broncos? Because if you think they're going to go over this point total, you think they're going to score 30 plus against this, what has been a good defense, but the Broncos have a lot of injuries. I mean, I think everybody's just like sick of playing with Russell Wilson and being coached by Nathaniel Hackett at this point.
Yep.
This is the point in the season where, and I kind of talked about it last week, teams, sometimes what you see on paper in rankings and what you think of teams doesn't apply. And it's hard to know exactly when. It's kind of more of an art, and sometimes you can't really know, but you're going to play some things certain ways just because things aren't as certain as it might seem because you have 12 or 13 games of data. But the reality is, this Broncos team, do you think that they're going to get rolled by the Chiefs? Are the Chiefs going to score 30 plus points? Because if they are, then based on the data we have, there's a good chance Kelce's rolling. there's a good chance that he's having, a game, the type of game that breaks away from the pack at tight end. And then based on what we've seen, when that happens, Mahomes is also a very viable play. And the ownership doesn't appear to be restrictive at all. I think Kelsey is going to have some ownership, but Mahomes is going to be sub 5%. And then you've got the receiving situation, which Kadarius Toney was just ruled out. So that keeps things a little bit tighter. So yeah, it's an interesting spot. I think my lean, I kind of like going back to the Isaiah Pacheco well. Isaiah Pacheco had in the last 4 games, he has 15 or more touches in every game. He had 23 touches in their game against the Rams 2 weeks ago, when it's set up very similarly to this game, with the Rams having an offense that is very conservative and is unlikely to really open things up, even if they fall behind. And they've got a defense that's probably going to keep the Chiefs from rolling off, 40 points. It's not like they're just a walkover defense. And it's a situation where the Broncos are more susceptible on the ground. So I could see a situation where Pacheco gets 20 touches again. And I think he's the type of guy, just from the eye test, seeing how violently he runs, how explosive he can be. At some point before the end of the season, I wouldn't be shocked if he puts up like a 25 to 30 point DraftKings game, and it could very well be this week.
I won't cry if it's this week. I would love it if it was during best ball playoffs. Due to my exposure, that would be a really cool time for him to do it on some of my teams that I got him going through on. So I won't cry if he goes there. You were talking about that there of when Kelsey gets there. When he gets there, let's talk about that tight end possession real quick, right? On the opposite side, we have, Greg, Mr. Dulcich, leading the pack right now. He's almost at double the ownership projection currently than Kelsey. How are you looking at this? Is this good chalk for you? Is this bad chalk for you? And I lead that in because I want to talk about, I don't know if you got a chance to read that Twitter thread this week. Got some pretty good exposure about the tight end position. There was a bunch of really sharp people talking about it. Dwayne McFarland started talking about it, and it got a lot of people commenting, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts are there.
I have not seen the Twitter thread. I think Dulcich he's fine chalk. Without Sutton, he is basically playing a wide receiver position. And it's a situation where at $3,400 and at a position that has been like a nightmare to figure out this year, he's almost certainly going to see 6 to 9 targets. And he has a role where he does get some downfield work. And I think he's like fine chalk. Generally speaking, I'm not trying to get many players on my team, on my rosters, that play for a team with a 17.5 point team total. I even look at something as simple as, like, sometimes you can get carried away with projections and this guy and that guy. But then, like, if you step back from a DFS tournament perspective, so Dulcich is $3,400. He's going to be 25 to 30% owned probably. And his team he's got not a great matchup. His team's probably not going to score many points. For $500 more, you've got David Njoku playing with the best quarterback of his career and the second highest team total of the week. And he's $500 more, which isn't much, and he's going to be sub 5% owned. And, I think David Njoku is equal or better athleticism. So when you look at it just from a tournament perspective, it's like, I don't think Dulcich is like terrible chalk. I don't think that I think teams can. It was earlier this year. He played in that game against the Jets, I believe it was, which was a very ugly game. It's back when Zach Wilson was still the quarterback.
Yeah, that game was bad.
And he was like $2,500, $2,700, like, and he was chalk. But I think he put up like 9 or 10 points, and like people were able to win GPPs with him on the team. So I think that's certainly he's very viable. I look at some other guys like Njoku that I mentioned. George Kittle's only $4,300.
We're going to save that. Let's save George. We're going to end with that game.
Schultz, who we talked about from the Cowboys game, he's $4,400 on a team that could score 6 touchdowns. So I think he's fine chalk. Again, we talk about it 1 week season all the time. We talk about roster construction mattering. So, I don't think that playing Dulcich with a Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, and a Vikings piece, like with that stack, and then Joe Mixon at running back, I don't think throwing Dulcich in there is going to help you, because you're eating a lot of ownership and playing kind of similar to the field with how you built the rest of your lineup. Yeah, but if you're playing a lower owned stack, like our next game we're gonna talk about, if you're stacking that game up, I think it'd be fine to be like, hey, I know this guy's gonna get targets and isn't gonna tank my lineup and throw up a 3-point game, barring injury. I think that's the type of lineup he makes a ton of sense in.
Well, let's I want to move on to that game, because the rest of this breakdown from a DFS theory perspective is really good. So if you're a member of the Inner Circle, if you're seeing behind the wall content, come check it out. It'll really give you a unique spot on this game. So we're going to talk about the Panthers at the Seahawks, and I just have to start and ask: did you watch the Monday night game? The Rams game? Did you watch the Rams Raiders?
Oh, the Thursday night game. The Thursday night.
Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it live, so I rewatched like the second half basically, but I knew what was going to happen.
Right.
I was following. I was not at home during it, so I was like following on my phone, like the play-by-play or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, this can't be right.
Yeah, it was that was wild, right? And the interesting narrative there would have been, right, if the Raiders end that game, right, and they run it and they get the first down and it's over, right? It's an entirely different conversation this week, right? It was fun to watch, right? It was a great last drive. If I was a Raiders fan, I would just be like so upset at how my team played that. They were playing not to lose, and instead they didn't win. I mean, there was a lot of stuff, but we can't talk about the Carolina Panthers without talking to Little Baker after, that experiment obviously failed there. And the new narratives in LA should be fun. I talked about it right after the game. I was like, I can't wait to hear this week about, Stafford has this huge contract. Stafford's injury prone. They have Baker for nothing. Is this, can McVay whisper to Baker and get him turned around?
Well, I think Stafford's career might be over.
Interesting.
I think he has a spinal. And a couple of people have talked about it, but he has a spinal cord contusion. Like he has a bruised spinal cord. That's like that means there's something. Ross Tucker, if anyone follows, Ross Tucker does some good content on NFL stuff, former offensive lineman. And he was talking about it because he had like a similar thing. And if you have a spinal cord contusion, it means something's bumping up against the spinal cord, and it means there's a disc out of place. So he has to have surgery basically, and it's a pretty risky surgery if he wants to play football again. So Tucker was just basically saying, Stafford's got to decide, like, does he want to have this risky surgery? And if not, then his career's over. And for a guy who has accomplished a lot, who's won a Super Bowl, his wife has had some health scares in the past. I think it was cancer she battled.
Yeah.
And
has taken a lot of hits over his career.
Yeah, he's had a lot of concussions. He's had shoulder issues, back issues, now this spinal cord contusion. I wouldn't be shocked if his career was over. And frankly, like, I mean, I'm a father, I've got a young daughter, so you start thinking about things from that perspective. And like, if he was my kid, if I was older and my kid was in that position, I would want them to stop playing football, so it'll be interesting. And I think from the Rams perspective, they being able to pick up someone with Baker's pedigree when you're potentially going to lose that franchise quarterback could look like quite the steal in a year or two.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and it already started and all that different stuff. So this is what I'm going to start in a unique spot on, because when I started looking at ownership earlier today, as I was getting back, the one that stood out to me, and I get it, it's a price thing, but currently projected as the third highest ownership is the Carolina Panthers defense versus the Seahawks. So I want to kind of start there. The Seahawks have a 24-point total, and I'm interested to see, one of the things I know you're big about is not paying for cheap defenses at high exposure, right? At high ownership. What are your thoughts there? Because I get it's $2,200, but I can't wrap my head around it. Like, am I missing something? Are we not seeing something? What are you seeing here?
Yeah, this again comes back to like it. And when you throw the Cowboys into this mix and how good of a spot we talked about they're in, you throw the Steelers are only 2,800. Yeah. They're going to probably be fairly highly owned, but they're playing Tyler Huntley, who has struggled a lot and, is probably going to be a low scoring game. You've got Brock Purdy on the slate. There's a lot of other options. I was pretty surprised by that the Panthers would be that highly owned. A lot of people just want to pay the least they can for defense every week. They just do it no matter what. And of those lower price defenses, yeah, the Panthers, they make the most sense. The Texans are right there. Obviously, the Panthers look way better. The Broncos play the Chiefs, who are one of the highest scoring offense in the league. The Giants play the Eagles. All the other defenses play much more high profile, high scoring type offenses. So it makes sense that they would be the most popular cheap defense, but it's not a spot that I'm particularly interested in. It does, the more as I'm talking through this right now, it does make some sense from the standpoint of how pass heavy I expect Seattle to be this week. And we know that defensive scoring is facilitated more so by opportunities from opponents passing to get sacks and interceptions, and forced fumbles from the quarterback. That's where you get more defensive fantasy points than from just looking for a spot where they're not going to let the other team score much. So, I think that, like, I get it, but it's not really a spot that I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, so that's you rolled it perfectly in, right? If you're unaware and just listening to this and haven't looked yet, and you're just starting to do, late Saturday afternoon, do your research, because you only build a couple lineups, and this is when you have time to do it. The Seahawks have, the walking wounded for the running back position. It's just a hot mess. So as Mike was alluding to, we're going to expect a lot of passing in this game. And, as I go back and I start looking at ownership again, while it's working its way up there, I'm just kind of shocked at, it's not higher while they're in the upper echelons, after what they did last week, that Seattle stack. I expected to see versus the Panthers a little bit higher ownership at this point, and it's not quite there yet. How are you attacking their passing slate?
Yeah, so on the Seattle side, they're most likely DJ Dallas and Kenneth Walker are both unlikely to play. They didn't practice all week. Very rarely, especially at the running back position where you take so many hits, it's very rare that one of those players would play. So what that leaves the Seahawks with is Travis Homer is their kind of next man up, and he's a passing game specialist. His strength is in the receiving game. Their other running back that we know will be active is Tony Jones Jr., who is sub replacement level. I mean, he's a effectively fifth string running back behind Penny, Walker, Dallas, Homer. He's the fifth man up. So you look at it from an approach, how what their play calling will be. And, we can look at just this last week, they played the Rams defense, and it turned into a very pass-heavy game plan once Walker went down. And I think you're going to see something similar this week. And I think the Seahawks defense has been so bad recently. You brought up the Baker Mayfield thing. So that Rams offense, all right, take one more step. The Raiders defense on the season is hands down the worst defense in the NFL.
Trash.
They're 32nd in the league in most metrics. They held the Rams to 3 points over the first 56 minutes on Thursday night. So that's the worst defense in the league, held the Rams to 3 points in 56 minutes. The Seahawks defense just gave up 23 points to that same Rams team. So what does that tell you about the Seahawks defense? So to me, that along with the fact that this Panthers offense has been surprisingly good recently. The Panthers offense has, in 4 of their last 5 games, has scored, I believe it's 22 or more points, which everybody thinks of the Panthers offense as how bad they have been for most of the year. But yeah, their last 5 games, they've got 4-point totals of 34, 21, 25, and 23. So I think this Panthers
Rule effect.
What's that?
The Matt Rule effect.
Yeah, and just PJ Walker and Sam Darnold have been better, and it's a matter of what do you the one game, and that's the thing. Going back to Baker, the one game Baker started for the Panthers, he just wasn't a good fit there. Was against the Ravens. They only scored 3 points. So in non-Baker Mayfield starts, they've scored 21 or more points every week. Now they face a very poor Seahawks defense that, gave up 40 to the Raiders 2 weeks ago, and they let the Rams, the pitiful Rams, score 23 on them last week. So it's reasonable that the Panthers are going to score some points here. They're not just going to get run. And the Seahawks, we know they're going to have a very pass-heavy game plan, and they're unlikely to be able to just shut it down. They're unlikely to get up 21-3 and just okay, now we can hand it to Tony Jones and whatever. So the pass rate should be very, very high. And when you look at Geno, Metcalf, Lockett, Geno's been so efficient this year, and Metcalf and Lockett combine for such a high percentage of the target market, the targets and yardage and touchdowns. It's a concentrated spot that we can expect greater usage than what the price shows. And they're not going to be unowned. These aren't going to be 1 or 2% plays, but I think that stacking those guys up, and you could even include Travis Homer or Noah Fant as a Geno with 3 players stack. And I think that's super viable. And I even would look at using 1 or 2 Panthers on the bring back.
So on that side of the ball, right, is it, DJ, and who else entices you there?
Dante Foreman. I really like Foreman. So yeah, Cam Akers has been dusty the entire season, and he had a 20-point DraftKings game just last week. And obviously Josh Jacobs was setting records 2 weeks ago against the Seahawks. Their run defense is very, very poor, and Foreman is just like a battering ram. He's just the type of guy that these teams that are struggling to tackle and have these schematic issues it's a problem. And then DJ Moore has been, it's weird to say because of what the narrative around Sam Darnold has been throughout his career and how bad he kind of has been. But when Sam Darnold's DJ Moore's quarterback, he's significantly better than when anyone else is over the last 2 years. So you look at those two guys and, they have a combined 10.9K salary, and we don't have to look that far. It was 4 or 5 weeks ago, those two combined, they each had 30-point games together in that Falcons game.
Yep.
And Seattle's been right at the center of several high-scoring shootout type situations this year. So yeah, I've been building some lineups where I've built several lineups already where it's Geno, Metcalf, Lockett, and Fant, or Homer instead of Fant, and then Moore and Foreman, and you've actually got a decent amount of salary to fill out those last three spots with it. And basically it's just a bet on, does this game go over the total? Because it's going to be concentrated in those areas.
Yeah, it's a great way to approach this. And I really like in our paid content area, the DFS interpretation of where we're going to go there. And I'm going to leave that for our subscribers to come check out. We're going to finish up with Tampa Bay at San Francisco. Low point total. I'm going to go back to the tight end, and we just started talking about it. We're going to start with Mr. Kittle, who missed, while he missed last week, right? We saw what happened. He is $4,300 this week. And that thread I was talking about, it was interesting to read. And here was my interjection into it and talking about what I would love to see from one season, but more importantly, where people were going for it right now, right? So right now, Chig with, Tennessee, he's cheap. He's 2,700, he's, top 10 ownership tight end right now, right? But does he really have the opportunity to break the slate? You hear us talk about it every week. There's only a couple of tight ends that really in the league that can break the slate, that are going to put you up 35 or 40 points. And Kittle is one of them. So at $4,300, can Kittle get you 25 points? George Kittle sure can, right? And if Kittle gets you 30, right, he's a must-have in that. But the narrative of it was you should start him over George Kittle this week. And, Dwayne was talking about there's just no way. Like, I'm not starting that guy, right, over George Kittle, who has, an 89% route participation rate when they're throwing. And what I said is I would love to see Kittle and I didn't explain it necessarily perfectly, in a non-blocking role. And what I mean by that is in a Gronk type role with Brady. What does that mean? I want to see Kittle on a team that throws the ball 65% of the time, right? And what hurts Kittle is elite other weapons, right? You got CMC, you got Debo, you got Ayuk. I get it, right? But again, that opportunity upside there for me is a unique spot to approach a pretty low scoring total game, and the overall being below 40.
Yeah. Kittle is very interesting, as you said. And I actually, not going to give away the farm here, but one of the cheap stacks that I mentioned in my player grid this week was Purdy with Kittle. Yeah. And the thought process is basically, if you look at what you're talking about, like Kittle can break the slate. And if you're putting him in your lineup, that's kind of what you're saying is like, well, he's too cheap. This guy can put up 20 to 30 points. Well, if George Kittle puts up a 24-point game, what does that look like? Well, let's break it down. That's probably 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. It's 24 points, including the DraftKings bonus. So if he has 100 yards and a touchdown right there, that means Purdy has at least 100 yards and a touchdown. Or if Kittle has 6 for 80 and 2 touchdowns, that's, again, around that 25-point range. And Purdy was fine last week. Like, he wasn't great, and he's not going to, he missed some throws, but he's not that different than what Jimmy G did for him. Like, they're going to run underneath stuff. They're going to try to get the ball in the hands of their guys, and they're going to let their guys make plays after the catch. And the other thing that people want to look at last week from a usage perspective, but they weren't expecting Purdy to play in that game. So right. Kittle became he was chipping before he went out on his routes a lot more. He was doing a lot of things, and he didn't have any reps. Now, if you're game planning for Brock Purdy all week, if you're Kyle Shanahan, George Kittle's probably a guy that you're going to want him to rely on a little bit, that you're going to want to. I think about back to the Monday night game in Mexico when Kittle had his 2-touchdown game. And I think his average depth of target was like 2 yards down the field, but he just made these like monster plays after the catch. And there's nothing like a high school quarterback could throw some of these throws that these guys are catching and then making plays after the catch. So just from a salary perspective, Purdy plus Kittle is $9,400 on DraftKings. So if Kittle's scoring 25, it's very likely that Purdy's scoring at least 15. Purdy scored 15 last week against the Dolphins in a game that they led the whole way. So that's and then what it opens up for you salary wise, and like there's upside there. Like if Kittle had like a 140 yard game with 2 touchdowns, or if he has a solid game and Debo and McCaffrey are catching screens, there's a lot of paths to that particular pairing going for 40 to 50 points, which is, you're looking at 4, 5, 6x the salary. And that opens you up to so many of the high priced players that are in really great spots this week.
So that's what I want. A great way to lead me into just tee up the question here for you, right? So do you see that with Shanahan trying to scheme more screens to CMC, screens to Debo, those type of things? And do you bring either one of those into that stack considering their price?
No, not price wise, because I think what you're betting on, if you're playing that stack, because let's be honest, the Bucs defense is pretty good and this is a very low scoring game. So if you bring those guys in, that's a lot of roster spots. That's a lot of salary all of a sudden that you're relying on. Now, I think McCaffrey in himself is a very good play. I think Debo's interesting at a lower price tag. So I think that they're all viable, but I wouldn't be playing like a 3-man stack there. McCaffrey without Mitchell, he's got basically the best running back role in the NFL. He's like the guy, he's going to see 8, 9, 10 targets this week, and he's going to be their focal point in the running game until the game is in hand. Basically, they're not using Jordan Mason except to just spell him sporadically. It's not like how Mitchell was working in for a series and that sort of thing. So yeah, CMC's role is terrific, and he in himself is a great play. I think Debo Samuel is super interesting. He had 4 carries again last week, and I think he had 10 targets. So yeah, I think Purdy he's just the quarterback or the point guard of this offense, kind of like Jimmy G was. And so I think that change in quarterback is hurting the perception on a lot of these guys far more than it should be. I don't think they're all going to hit, but I would be surprised if one of them doesn't put up a really nice price considered score.
So with that being said, how do you get yourself, and do you want any exposure to the Bucs in this game versus that 49ers defense?
Yeah, a lot's going to depend on Leonard Fournette's status. He was added to the injury report Thursday, and then he didn't practice Friday. So if he doesn't play, then Rachaad White becomes like a great play. The Bucs have one of the worst running games in the NFL, and the 49ers have the best run defense in the league. So the Bucs are probably going to have a high volume of passing, similar to what they had to do against the Saints on Monday night. And in that game, Fournette and White combined for 12 receptions. So I think Rachaad White is very interesting. I would kind of prefer if Fournette was active, because at this point I'm of the assumption he's not fully healthy. So I'd kind of like him to, and Schefter to say like tonight to come out and say Fournette's going to play so that White doesn't get real steamed up, But I think White in that scenario still is going to be the guy who has the larger low workload where it's like 70-30 split towards him. And I was saying this earlier this week, and I said it a couple places. Even if they split it both halfway, the Bucs are likely to be high pass volume. And you look at what the running backs did. So if we assume they each have 6 receptions again, all it takes for one of them is to fall in the end zone, and they're already at like 12 or 13 points before you add any yards onto it. So for mid 5K and a lot of passing games, receivers that are more expensive that I want to get to this week, I think that White is really interesting just from a standpoint of he can get you a 15 to 20 point score that it's not going to win it for you, but it can open you up to what could win it for you. So I guess if that makes sense, that's kind of my approach to them. And then you look at the receivers. I actually did a thing on Twitter yesterday about Mike Evans, and it's just wild. He's been one of the best touchdown scorers in the NFL, really since he's come into his career. He's second in the league in receiving touchdowns in the last 4 years. But in the last 8 games, he doesn't have a receiving touchdown on 68 targets. Since Brady got there over the last 2 seasons, he was catching a touchdown once every 8 targets. So during that 8-game stretch, he should, based on previously how he's performed, he would have 8 touchdowns during that 8-game stretch, and he has none. Now, sometimes matchups and how teams look and whatever, it doesn't make sense. But for Mike Evans at 6,400 with the usage he's been seeing and the lack of the big plays and the lack of touchdowns, at some point it's likely to correct. And I just think it's an interesting thing to look at.
Okay, so let's talk about that. You just teeing me up great today because I have that noted from your Twitter thread. So I'm going to give you 3 options on this game and tell me what direction and how you like approaching this, right? So we have the Purdy Kittle stack. Do you run it back with Evans? All right, and no White. Okay. We have Kittle. Do you stack him with the Niners defense against a team that's probably going to have close to the most pass attempts this week? There's a good chance because of how much they throw the ball, right? So you take advantage of the Niners defense. And what do we say we're looking for? We're looking for interception opportunities, sack opportunity, right? And we know that's going to be there. Or do you go for a different direction and take the stance of we're going to take, Evans and White and just run them naked and say, hey, they get us there. And the 49ers have, spread it between Debo, Kittle, Samuel, Ayuk, and none of them break the slate, but they still get the points there. How do you like looking at that and walk our listeners through how you would break down that process as you looked at those different situations?
Yeah. So I think it's understanding kind of the story or how things would likely play out for certain players to have their games that really pay off, and then what that would likely mean for the other side of the ball and which players that fits well. So like you talked about the Purdy Kittle stack. So if you're playing that, I'm looking at that as Kittle's games where he is getting there. Usually they're being pushed a little bit. And so you could go multiple ways. You could go with the Bucs are in control, which could be White as the running back. It could be Godwin as he's had like double-digit targets in I think like 8 of the last 9 games or something. It could be Evans had the big plays to push him there. So I think any of those are viable. I think A really interesting one, especially on FanDuel, that I like is Christian McCaffrey and Mike Evans, because McCaffrey is like the engine of this offense and he's priced fairly low. And so I could see a situation where McCaffrey, if he has that big game and San Francisco gets a big lead, that might be where Tampa Bay is forced to open things up and push things down the field a little bit more, which would benefit Evans. From the flip side, I think that the Purdy Kittle, if they're throwing more, if Kittle is having to get there, then I think it's more likely that the Bucs are able to play how they want to play, which is, again, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, but that has mostly been in the underneath area. So that could be, we saw the game against the Browns where Chris Godwin caught, I think it was 12 passes for 110 yards and a touchdown. And he was just working as that like short underneath guy, just getting peppered with targets. So I think like a Godwin or a White would make more sense with the Purdy Kittle stack. And I think Evans would make more sense with McCaffrey. And as you alluded to, I think the 49ers defense is in a great spot this week. The Bucs offensive line has struggled all year, and they're going to have to throw the ball a lot this week, regardless of game script. So, and the 49ers defense has just been teeing off on people. So, and both things can be true. You know, the Niners defense can have a good game, and so can Mike Evans or Rachaad White.
Yeah, I think that's a spot that a lot of people miss from the DFS side, is that you can have the defense have a great game, right? Look at the, Cleveland Browns last week, and have the other side of the ball still have players that are helping you get there, right? Both of those things can be true.
Right. I mean, it's not hard. Like, imagine Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. Imagine the Niners get the opening kickoff and he has a great scripted opening drive and they march down the field and McCaffrey scores a touchdown. And then the next possession, the Bucs are having to throw. And would it shock you if at this game, I think is a 4:25 Eastern kickoff, would it shock you if at 4:40 Chris Hansen pops on your red zone and shows you a play with a pick six from the Niners to go up 14-0? And then what happens at that point? So like the Niners defense is basically optimal at that point, and they're going to tee off for the next 3.5 quarters. But also White and Godwin and Evans are going to see just an incredible amount of targets. So, people get too caught up in, if this defense is doing great, like these offensive pieces are all going to be terrible. Like it might be a nightmare day for Brady, but the other guys, like they're going to touch the ball a lot. And they're not, this isn't a team that all these guys aren't $7,500 to $8,000, right? So that comes into it too.
And we're getting lower ownership on everybody than what we would normally see for most of the players in here, right? Like even going to, like, as I go to running back, right? Like McCaffrey's only projected at 12% right now, right? Like that's in a unique spot. When you start looking at wide receiver, that's the one where I started going, okay, scroll down. Godwin, 6.5% projected right now. That number was,
and he's usually like, the field usually loves Godwin. Like he's rarely lower than like 15%.
Right. So you're looking at him and at his price, right? I mean, it's 6,700. Like, where does he fall within there? Like, I thought that was really interesting. So I think there's some spots to leverage what in a normal week would probably be a higher owned game to get us there. All right. As we're finishing up here, I asked Hilo about this earlier, and we were talking about this. I got two things for you. We have, because we've talked about tight ends so much. How do you feel about Andrews this week? Right. We have Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, all on the same slate. Right. There's a lot of salary, right, to pay up. How do you feel knowing what Huntley has done with him in the past? And how are you viewing tight end this week?
So for me, I like Andrews a lot on FanDuel, and I don't really like him on DraftKings. So I
If you're
think
watching, you guys would have saw me make my sad face.
He's a guy that I guess everyone thinks about that one good game he had last year against the Packers that really, and he had a solid game, but I think it was with Josh Johnson actually at quarterback against the Bengals. And that run he had towards the end of last year, and specifically that one big game with Huntley. But Huntley hasn't been great, and the Steelers defense is legit. I mean, again, you talk about Andrews, I think like you should be very excited if you have him on like your season-long team. He's likely to have a very good game. But when I look at him on DraftKings and what his price is at, so you've got TJ Hawkinson for $1,400 less, and Hawkinson's role has basically been the same as Andrews since he got to Minnesota. You've got Dalton Schultz and George Kittle over $2,000 less than him. You've got Dulcich and Noah Fant and David.
Fryermuth is only $4,500.
Right. So it's just a pricing thing. You look at him on FanDuel and he's $6,800, and some of these guys are only like $1,000 cheaper than him, and like he's Mark Andrews. When you're paying like almost double the price of some of these guys on DraftKings, it's tough. And it's like he could get there and have a 30-point game, and that still doesn't necessarily break you because of what he restricts you from. There's not a ton of great value spots like where at receiver and running back where you can go down and feel like super comfortable. So if you're playing Andrews on DraftKings, it's hard to make that fit without sacrificing a lot at the other positions. So he could have a 30-point game, but if a couple of these guys that are 3,000 to 4,500, if they have like a 15 to 18-point game, you don't really gain anything.
Yep, that's why I wanted to ask and get your breakdown there on which slate you preferred them on. And we talked about it a little last week as we end up here, right? Week 14, you have your teams that are going through best ball, right? You kind of, we all have a bunch on the bubble, but you got your teams that, okay, like short of, World War III, these teams are going in. Who are some of the guys you're excited about, for this playoff run of, week 15, 16, 17 here?
I'm quietly very optimistic because the two tight ends that I've been that I was very heavily on, and that when I scroll through and I look at like my teams that are currently advancing or are in third place and like have a good chance to make the jump this week, David Njoku and Dallas Goedert are on almost every team, at least one of them, and sometimes two of them. So Njoku coming back this week, and Goddard, all the positive things about him likely coming back next week. That's very exciting. And then it's funny because so many of my teams look very similar, like at running back, Pollard, Ramondre, Rashad White. Those guys are on a ton of teams. Receivers, I've got Pickens on a ton of teams. I built a lot of teams with Deshaun Watson, and then I have like Amari or DPJ or Njoku with him. So I'm hoping that they can shake the rust off this week and have a decent game heading into those best ball playoffs.
Yeah, so I'm on the Goddard train. I'm pulling up. You see me looking down here. I'm looking at some of my exposure. I'm on the Goddard train. I'm big. You've heard me talk about it now, right? I have a lot of Fields Kmet stacks that I didn't stack Mooney or anybody else, Monty with them. I have a lot of there. And then the other one for me is, and I'm excited to see what he can do towards the end of the season here. I have a bunch of Bellinger, right? I was getting him in, the end of drafts. I liked his upside. And for me, it was the story I told was it's Daboll, right? What did Daboll do with Knox in Buffalo? So I thought, hey, where I'm getting him, right, allowed me some opportunity there. Running back, right? Swift is my guy. He's my number one owned. I have a ton of Barkley. I'd love to see him get going. And then I have a ton of ETN, Pacheco, Stevenson, CMC. So I I fortunately faded, and it could bite you, right, in weeks 15 through 17, because where I think is a land. But I didn't fade, but I drafted a lot more CMC than I did JT, right, as far as that goes, in that 1-2 spot. I just liked the overall usage of what I think CMC can do. I'd still love to see Tony get going. But, one that's, a couple that's killing me is Sutton, right? I was big on Sutton. That's a crusher for me. There's a couple others in there that I'd like to see, get going. But quarterback for me is Fields. And I'm looking here. I actually have a ton of Deshaun Watson too. So that'll be interesting to see what if he can turn it around. He obviously looked like he hadn't played a game in 2 years. I'll be interested to see how he can look this week. And really, I drafted him to say, hey, right, if he gets back here, gets a couple games under his belt, right, with where he could go, what can we see, coming down the stretch here. And it'll be fun to sweat these out and talk about, because now I don't look at best ball. I don't even really look at my week to week until we get here. Like, I'll peek at them, but like I don't really care till now, right? Because it really doesn't matter. So I'll be interested to see where it gets going this week.
Well, and really, there's nothing you can do. Like
right.
None of it matters, really. We're all gonna. It's fun to watch. Like it's a fun extra sweat, but
right.
Like we're all helpless at this point.
Yeah, it's what's interesting for me to see is, in the social media space and Twitter space, where everybody's, the guys that are really into best ball, and they're talking about, hey, look at all the teams that have scored me here. Like, they got me this many points. Like, I have a bunch of Philly, Miami stacks that have gotten me a ton of points, but I don't think it's that's right. For me, it's what are the other pieces, right? I really care, what other pieces are going to, the unique pieces, right? Just like we saw last year, right? We had week 16 with, Chase and that stack. Week 17, you had to have access to, that Detroit Seattle game in week 17 last year. So I'm interested to see, where this plays out, because, everybody talked about, and let's use one. The Cardinals were the talk of best balls, hey, look at their schedule at the end here, right? 15, 16, 17, the Cardinals got a great schedule. And who knows, it could go there, but man, they've had, we've seen what their struggles have been this season. So it'll be interesting to see who this week, for me, what I'm actually excited to watch is who over the next few weeks, like what goes there, and then what that makes the narrative going forward. And then they make the gospel this year, as I like to call it. Right. So best ball's so new and there's so little data. It's interesting to see people call it the gospel, and this is what you have to do. So I'll be interested to see like what wins it, and they'll say, okay, hey, this is what you have to have next year going forward.
Right. Yeah. The overreaction to the 1 year sample based on specifically what happens in those playoff weeks is interesting. It's an interesting psychological experiment.
For sure. And then last question of the week, who is on the lower price side? Give me somebody under $5,000. Give me one or two guys that you like this week, in that, 35, $3,000 up to $5,000 range.
Yeah. So I like Elijah Moore. He's a guy that just talked about best ball. I've got a decent amount of him, and it's interesting that his season, his advance rate probably won't be great, but he's a guy who could kind of come down the stretch with Mike White as his quarterback. So Elijah Moore is an interesting one. 3,500. I expect the Jets have been passing much more with Mike White the last 2 weeks, and the implied game total says that they should have to throw a lot, and I would expect the Bills to give a lot of attention to Garrett Wilson. So that's an interesting one. In that same game, James Cook kind of seems to be taking over that Bills backfield and is 4,600. We were just talking about the Browns. I think Kareem Hunt at 4,600, just from who Kareem Hunt is as a player, and he's in that game that's the second highest total. And you look at, he actually had pretty solid usage, especially in the first half. It stood out to me. He was on the field a lot with Deshaun Watson, and his skill set kind of fits if they're going to open things up a bit more, if they're going to have to throw more. His skill set fits a little bit better than Nick Chubb. So that'll be an interesting situation there. So like those are three guys that are, 3,500 for Morris, 500 over the minimum, and then Hunt and Cook at 600 over the minimum at running back. Those are guys who a 20-point game wouldn't be surprising at all from.
Right. For me, it's in that Cleveland game, the 5,000 and below is Donovan Peoples-Jones, right? We're still getting him under 5. He's projected sub 3% ownership right now. And like he can also really easily put up 0. But if him and Watson start getting their timing down, right, we've seen how Watson likes to target deep threats, right? And next thing you know, does he get you, can he get you 20 points? I really like that spot for him, at that price point. And then the other one for me is Justin Watson, right? In Kansas City. The fact for me that Sky Moore, if I was a dynasty player, I'd be worried about Sky Moore, right? With what's been going on in Kansas City, the fact he hasn't been able to demand, from his playability, more ownership and more time, tells me like, hey, where's the upside? And for me, Watson's a guy that, is that, sub probably 2% owned, cheap guy that can go in that, hey, if that game goes, and we talked about it, there's a guy that's, helps you offset that Kelsey Mahomes pricing, right? And gives you a 3 stack there for me. So I really like Watson in this spot this week.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head with Sky Moore. So he does have he's got extra opportunity, and he kind of fits that gadget role with Hardman and Tony out. But at the same time, they've got Hardman and they just traded for Tony. So that kind of tells you a lot about how they see Sky Moore. So, yeah, I think that Watson's likely to have a pretty big role. Very interesting there. I think Valdez-Scantling or Juju is also interesting there.
Those drops last week. I played him. He was one of my salary saver spots on my Philly double stack. MVS.
Okay.
And we had those couple big drops last week. So sorry, that's little post traumatic stress.
Because he had 2 catches for 71 yards. So yeah, it wouldn't have taken much for that to get over 100 with a touchdown if he holds onto the ball.
The catches. No, he had him. He had the opportunity. He dropped a couple of them.
I'm saying his stat line was 2 for 71, but he dropped he had 4 missed targets. Yeah, but that's who he is.
Right. He is. He is who he is. And I keep going back to that but because the one game he catches them, right? The once a year maybe now. He catches him, he's going to break the slate at his price, right? When he actually hauls in all those targets, right? Ask two, for those who really play a lot of MME, ask Two Guns what he thinks about MVS. So, right. That's, when he gets you there, he gets you there. So it's there. Well, we thank everybody for tuning in. Again, if you're not in our Discord, come check it out. We have a lot of this content available on our Discord. And, we want to show you the value that we have first. And from there, then you can say, wow, I'm getting all this. Imagine what's behind the paywall. One of those is, Mike's Sunday Crunch. And he's breaking down, the Sunday afternoon slate and where he's looking at that afternoon only slate to get some leverage there. And it's a really unique spot that I enjoy reading every week. And it usually gets me to look at some lineups a little bit differently than I would have. I've been like, okay, why do we want to pivot here and how to process those? So thanks everybody. And hope you guys have a great week.